It is truly Mish again. For the third consecutive year, the Wolverines head into the college football playoff, holding the title of Big Ten champions, shutting out Iowa and Indianapolis on Saturday night. And now, for the first time in this three-year run, the number one overall seed heading into the CFP and headed to the Rose Bowl to take on Alabama. Welcome inside this special college football playoff selection edition of Big Ten Live alongside former Iowa Hawkeye Anthony Herron. I'm Rick Pizzo. We found out moments ago that Michigan is headed back to the college football playoff. It was not a surprise. Right. Third consecutive year, Jim Harbaugh leads his team into the CFP, but the first time as the number one overall seed. And after a season that was unlike not just the last two, unlike any that we've seen in recent memory.
I mean, it's a season that was so deep in college football, and a lot of that credit to the transfer portal, where you saw teams all around the country with experienced playmakers at quarterback, more depth on defense. And so for this to be the season where Michigan has broken through and gotten that number one overall seed heading into the CFP with everything that surrounded this program throughout the offseason, into the season, not having their head coach for half the year, credit to everyone in that organization, and especially all those players in the locker room, the leadership that returned to sort of guide Michigan towards this point.
And it feels different. I'm not suggesting that it feels better or feels worse. It just feels different, and maybe that is because Michigan is the number one seed according to the College Football Playoff Committee. There was really no doubt that Michigan and Washington were going to be in after their respective wins in the Big Ten and Pac-12 championship game. Just a matter of who got the number one seed. It is Michigan. Washington is number two. Texas, by virtue of the best regular season win, taking down Alabama in Tuscaloosa and their Big 12 championship victory over Oklahoma State in emphatic fashion, earning the number three seed. The controversy came at number four. Alabama gets the nod over Florida State. And shortly after the selections were made, we learned, and this is, again, no surprise, that Michigan is headed to the Rose Bowl. And what a Rose Bowl game it will be on January 1st, 2024. The number one seed Michigan, the number four seed Alabama, two of the true brands in all of college football. We'll get to that matchup in just a second, but we focus on Michigan and the fact that they are number one. The case could have been made, certainly, to put Washington at number one. Would have changed a lot in terms of location, in terms of opponents, but the committee believed that the body of work that Michigan put on the table over the course of 13 games made them the best team in the country.
And I think the committee, in putting Michigan at number one, still showed a level of respect to the Iowa Hawkeyes, who went into that Big Ten championship game last night, ranked in the top 20. And we've heard Boo Corrigan in recent weeks talk about the respect they have for Iowa's defense, for Iowa's special teams. And Michigan had the advantage in special teams last night, to a lot of folks' surprise, but it showed the completeness of their football team in a game where J.J. McCarthy struggled throughout, where Michigan's offensive line struggled against that phenomenal front seven for the Hawkeyes, and then you still have a 4-score victory and shut out the opponent. And so that showed a level of strength in all phases for the Wolverines, who finished against one of the tougher schedules in the month of November in college football. And by comparison to Washington, yes, an undefeated regular season, and being able to beat the Oregon Ducks twice within the same calendar year. That is an exceptional accomplishment for the Dogs. But in the end, Michigan, especially with the dominance that they showed on the scoreboard in the majority of the games they played this season, the committee, I think rightfully so, ended up putting them at number one.
I know it's just a slogan, Michigan versus everybody, but the Wolverines applied that to the football field this year. 6 games without Jim Harbaugh on the sidelines against everybody. They went 6-0. The fact that no one really expected them to beat Ohio State this year. Outside of maybe their locker room, they knock off Ohio State for the third straight year. And they made the drive that sealed the game after Zach Zinner, one of their all-everything offensive linemen, goes down. Again, I think a lot of folks thought that maybe Michigan was not the team that Michigan believed they were. I think this motivated them all year long, even though they were the defending Big Ten champs. They were in the college football playoff. They somehow utilized all this to still carry a chip on their shoulder. That's really hard to do when you're as good as this team has been.
When you have Blake Corum return for another season, when you have the aforementioned, the great Zach Zinner return for another season, Mike Barrett and Chris Jenkins, guys who had opportunities to go on to the next level, but came back to Ann Arbor for this purpose right here. We've seen the images of J.J. McCarthy and others hanging around on the field after their college football playoff loss to TCU last season, using that as motivation, wanting to take those images in and have it sort of brained into their cerebrum and all throughout the offseason, all throughout the regular season, even in games where Jim Harbaugh wasn't there, and every ounce of motivation that they could find to make sure they were locked in and week out. There's not a team who sort of grabbed the moment every single week in the way that Michigan did. That's a part of why they were so dominant in games, even where things maybe got a little bit helter-skelter or where early in the regular season, the run game wasn't what we anticipated the Michigan run game should be. We saw the most precise version of J.J. McCarthy throughout much of the year, but as much as anything, the DNA, the chemical makeup of the Wolverines locker room is why they were able to control games so much throughout the totality of the year.
Quickly, and we'll get into this much more throughout the course of the coming weeks, the Alabama matchup. I think you'd make the argument that among the other three teams that are in the playoff, Texas, Washington, Alabama, I think you could state that Alabama is probably the toughest matchup for Michigan among that group of three teams.
Style of play, there's a lot of similarities between Michigan and Alabama. And I mean, especially at the quarterback position where you have a multi-dimensional talent behind center for the Crimson Tide. Started slow early in the season, did Jalen Milroe, but then as the year wore on and they kind of locked into him as the quarterback, we really saw the skills he brings to the table in the line of scrimmage. We know how Nick Saban recruits there. We know what Alabama's capable of on both the offensive and defensive fronts. That's where Michigan has really stepped their game up in recent seasons and why they've won the last 3 Big Ten championships. So styles make fights, and really both these teams love to dominate up front, and they have these multi-generational sort of quarterbacks who bring those dimensions to the table. So, I mean, I think it's a tough matchup for Alabama, just like it is a tough matchup for Michigan.
Final Rose Bowl in the 4-team playoff era. Going to be as good as it gets. Michigan, Alabama is the traditional time, if it's not the traditional Big Ten Pac-12 matchup. 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock local time out west on Monday. Michigan headed to the college football playoff as the number 1 seed following a 13th consecutive win this season. Jim Harbaugh and the Wolverines taking on Iowa Saturday night, Indianapolis in the 2023 Big Ten champ game. Quiet first quarter until Samaj Morgan takes this bomb from Torrey Taylor. 52 yards on the punt, but 87 yards back the other way. Morgan would eventually be pushed out at the Iowa 5-yard line. Anthony mentioned it at the top of the show, thought special teams would be the Iowa advantage. Michigan flipping the script. 2 plays later, Blake Corum, 2-yard touchdown run. Wolverines on top 10-0. Second quarter, defense on display for the Hawks. Anthony, you know a thing or two about this Iowa defense, and they did get after this offensive line and J.J. McCarthy.
You saw guys like Logan Lee, Y.A. Black, Deontay Craig. The front four is penetrating into the backfield on a consistent basis, and it made J.J. McCarthy really uncomfortable. Part of the reason why, though, the second and third level of that Hawkeye defense was able to reroute Michigan wide receivers on a consistent basis, gave that pass rush time to get home.
I think that Bama front seven may enjoy watching that film when they're scouting the Wolverines. In the third quarter, of course, the Michigan defense really good as well. Now, Deacon Hill, sacked by Mike Sainristil, originally ruled incomplete, but it's overturned, ruled a fumble, and then the officials, even though they were blowing the whistle and saying incomplete, said the recovery was in the process of the game. Michigan football. Blake Corum, next play, up the middle, 6 yards out. I disagree with the call. I don't really think it would have changed the ultimate outcome of the game. 17-0 Michigan at that point, now 20-0. Deacon Hill taken down again, this time by Braden McGregor, leads to another Michigan field goal. They add one more. The Wolverines shut out the Hawkeyes, 26-0. Post-game reaction, Mike Hall with a handful of Wolverine winners.
When you look back on your career, Michigan hadn't beaten Ohio State in a while since you got here, had never won the division, never been a Big Ten championship game victor. And now it's happened time after time after time. What does that feel like?
You know, it feels great. You know, I believe we changed the narrative, you know, and that's why I wanted to come to such a great university like University of Michigan, you know, to change the narrative, you know, and we've done that 3 straight years, you know, so now we just got to keep it going.
Why will this year in the playoff be different than last year?
Experience, you know, I think that's one of the greatest advantages, and, you know, we're not done yet, and we have that mindset. It's, you know, the fans aren't rushing the field. It's almost like we've been here before, and our number 1 goal isn't accomplished yet, so we're going to keep fighting until we get it.
I mentioned this last week to Sainristil, but the last time Michigan beat Ohio State 3 years straight was '97, which ended in a national championship, and now you guys are off to the playoff. What do you need to do in these remaining games, however many there are, to make sure there are more games?
Yeah, man, just staying consistent. I try to tell these guys all the time, be consistent, do what got us to this point, man. Just kind of prepare every day, every week, just like we have the Ohio State game, man. You know what I mean? That 97 team, that's kind of who we chasing this year. So hopefully we end in the same way.
Sixth all-time meeting coming up at the Rose Bowl. Alabama with a 1-win lead over Michigan in this series. Did meet in the 2020 Citrus Bowl. It was Bama 35-16 as Michigan heads in as the first ever Big Ten team to be ranked number 1 in the playoff. Will also make its first Rose Bowl appearance since the 2006 season. That means in the history of the Big Ten Network, we've never been to Pasadena when the Wolverines have been playing for the Rose Bowl championship trophy. Pretty amazing stuff. Rick Pizzo back with Anthony Herron. We saw Iowa's defense getting after J.J. McCarthy, and we know that Zach Zinner is gone. We know this offensive line had some struggles against Iowa, but McCarthy can run the football and likely will need to run the football against Alabama. How do you see that matchup with the Michigan offense and that Crimson Tide D?
Well, I love the fact that J.J. McCarthy's gotten to the point in his career where he can get called into runs, but the scramble mode is where he's pretty exceptional now, that he's just been on the field so consistently. Second full season as a starter for the Wolverines, and so where his precision as a passer has continued to improve. The rhythm and timing he throws the ball with, this is still one of the things that can separate himself from a lot of the other athletes on the field. His ability to keep his eyes down the field, to have a passing temperament while on the move. And we know weapons like Colston Loveland, Roman Wilson, and others. As he's on the move, the scramble drill for the Wolverines are where a lot of their exceptional explosive passes have been able to be completed this season. It'll be necessary against an Alabama defense that will show you a variety of odd fronts up front. They'll show you a variety of looks, and it'll test the discipline of J.J. McCarthy. And, not only Zach Zinner, Michigan got a little bit banged up on the interior of their offensive line last night as well. They'll have time to mend those wounds, to kind of lick those wounds a little bit, but they'll have a lot to dissect pre-snap against the Tide.
Go to the other side of the ball. Jalen Milroe, more of a true runner, do call a lot of design quarterback runs for Milroe. And all due respect, we're not ready to put him in the Heisman conversation, despite the fact that he wanted it after that 4th and goal from the 31-yard line that actually kept Alabama alive in the playoff. Still, this Bama offense is much different than it was early in the year when they got smacked around by Texas. It'll be interesting to see how effective Michigan's defense can be against the kind of offense that truly it really hasn't seen a lot this year.
And so now you'll have a very multi-dimensional offense for Washington. They can throw it with precision. They can throw the deep ball, and Michael Penix Jr., that beautiful left-handed delivery, can throw it downtown on the money to so many playmakers on the outside. And with the emergence of Dillon Johnson in the backfield, now you have a Washington offense that can keep their defense off the field. They can convert 3rd and shorts in a way that they maybe struggled with a bit earlier in the season. And so now that Texas offense that throws it all over the yard and that is also physical on the line of scrimmage, yes, I do expect we're going to see a lot of points in that game.
Talked about health with Michigan, who needs to get healthy. This will also help both Washington and Texas. Michael Penix was banged up at the end of that Washington State win. Yeah. Quinn Ewers missed some time. Obviously, he looked just fine against Oklahoma State. And we get into health, we get into availability, and that leads us into the controversy of this year's CFP rankings because Florida State, the undefeated Power 5 champion from the ACC, left out. Alabama gets the nod. Don't think there was as much controversy over Georgia. This is a team that, as good as they've been the last couple of years, lost their chance to get in with that loss to Alabama. What's your take on the committee opting not to put Florida State in? This is the first time in the history of the playoff that an undefeated Power 5 conference champ has been left out.
It would have been the first time that we'd seen the SEC completely left out of the playoff as well. But even in just viewing this season through a prism, it is the first time that a team who was number 1 in the penultimate rankings ended up dropping all the way out, as Georgia has done. But I think Alabama earned their way in. You look at some of the victories that the Tide have had this season, wins over Ole Miss and LSU, taking down the number 1 team in the country. This season's number 1 and really the universal number 1 over the last 3 years, being able to defeat Georgia. Yes, a 4th and goal from the 31-yard line was a big separating factor in that. This could have all gone very differently. But I have a hard time sitting here sort of feigning incredulity about Florida State being left out. Not only the Jordan Travis injury, but it's just a down year in the ACC. I mean, this is probably the weakest year we've seen in the Southeastern Conference in the entire history of the college football playoff process, and it still was decidedly better than the ACC this season, so I believe the Tide deserved to be in.
Mike Norvell is on the phone for you in the green room. He would like to chat.
I would have voted against you, Mike. I would have voted against you.
Appreciate the honesty, my friend. Final thoughts on Michigan. The Big Ten champ headed back to the college football playoff for the third straight season, but still seeking that first CFP victory. Yes, the Wolverines have it again and headed to the CFP once again for the third consecutive year after a third straight Big Ten title and a 13-0 record. Did a lot of that, half of the regular season victories, with the head coach Jim Harbaugh suspended and unable to be on the sidelines for game day. The head coach and his star running back Blake Corum now standing by with Nicole Auerbach.
I'm here with Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh. Coach, what was your reaction to seeing that number one, the first Big Ten team to be ranked number one in the CFP era?
Bet. I mean, like some of the players have been saying, and that's it's just a beautiful thing. You know, it's bringing everyone together.
And to draw Alabama, is that a team that you're excited to play? Was it a team that was on your radar? There was a lot in flux about who you guys could possibly play.
Yeah, there was. I mean, just like everybody else, we were, wondering who it would be. Yeah, we're just looking for a time and a place to play, and now we know it. So we're going to take some time off, about a week, and then we'll get back and get locked in for that game.
So you go from winning a third straight Big Ten championship to now being the number one seed. I mean, it's pretty great 24 hours, I imagine.
Oh, it's been a great 24 hours, but I always say to my guys, like, the story was already written, so, we're excited to be the number one team. We're blessed. We're honored. Now we just got to be where our feet are, go back to the drawing table and fix up some things and make sure we're prepared, like no other when it comes time to play Bama.
What's the biggest challenge with their defense? Like, what does your offense need to do in this game? I know you haven't watched tape yet, but just out of the gate.
100%. The DNs are solid. Chris Braswell, Dallas Turner, great DNs, great offense. They have a quarterback that's mobile on the offensive side. Their defense is good with the linebackers and the secondary. So, we must strain. We must stick to the Michigan roots. We must play Michigan ball. We must be precise. We must execute at the highest level. But once I watch a little more film, I'll give you a better answer. But they're a solid team, great DNs.
Blake Corum, one of the stalwarts, one of the guys in the locker room that kept everybody even.
Right.
Really happy for that young man. Decided to come back. Of course, wasn't able to participate a year ago. J.J. McCarthy is back. So much of this defense, as you mentioned, is back. So there's a lot of stability. And yet, this has been a wild season for Michigan, who now finds itself exactly where it wanted to be, in the playoff, in the Rose Bowl, and as a bonus, against one of the other great brands in this sport, Alabama.
And when you mention the great brands in the sport, think about what this century has been in college football, where for a while, Michigan was trying to claw their way back into being the program that historically they had been for so many decades, so many generations of football fans before now. And now 3 seasons in a row, winning the Big Ten, 3 seasons in a row, making the college football playoff. And now this latest challenge, where every step along the way this season, Michigan has responded and surmounted every challenge. Now they have the most dynastic program we've seen this century, led by the greatest coach of all time. The Alabama Crimson Tide await the Michigan Wolverines in the Rose Bowl. Jim Harbaugh said it to Nicole. Bet. I cannot wait to see what this looks like on the field between the Wolverines and the Tide. They had to beat Georgia, period. It doesn't get any better than the opportunity to beat the Alabama Crimson Tide.
If you have the means, may I suggest a trip out to Pasadena, because it truly doesn't get any better.
Yes, sir.
For Anthony Herron, I'm Rick Pizzo. Michigan headed back to the CFP.